Hello, bonjour, and welcome back to the Liberated Self podcast with your host, Olivia Atsa. I hope that you've been able to find some time to tend to yourself during these past few weeks because it's been a lot, especially if you live in North America. And I do hope that you are enjoying these last few warm and sunny days before the season officially changes. And I can see for sure that I am trying to soak up on the sun until things completely shift. But we can already see the subtle shifts. The leaves are changing colors and the temperature has dropped, so it's cooler now. And I'm thinking about that expression in French that says j'ai un petit pincement au cœur. And when I think about me talking about the season changing and us getting into the winter, I'm a little bit sad, I'm not gonna lie. Because to be honest, thinking about the upcoming winter month truly makes me want to scream a little. Just a little bit, I promise. But I'm definitely not looking forward to waking up every day to the sound of my bones and joints cracking like my body's about to break apart. And on the other hand, though, I've been trying to identify a few fun winter activities to immerse myself into. So at least I no longer dread the winters as much as I do right now. Listen, if you don't live here, you cannot possibly understand how long the winter lasts. It is way longer than what I was used to when living in Austria a couple of years ago, which was my first ever exposure to winter. And I think that's mainly what makes it difficult for me. Anyway, all that to say, I'm slowly realizing that being miserable for this long is not a healthy alternative. So I need to find activities that I can do so I can be okay, or like I can settle my body a little bit more into the winter here. But yeah, enough about my stance on the Canadian winter. Today, I feel like I want to jump right back into the topic. So if you haven't listened to the part 1 that was released, I think about 3 weeks ago now, please go ahead and do it before coming back to this one. In the part 1 episode, I mentioned that I'll be focusing on the link between pain, grief, and self-abandonment and how I learned to recognize the patterns within myself. I try to introduce the topic as well a little bit to you by sharing the kind of relationship I have with grief at this point and how it helped me grow and transform over the years. I love talking about grief. Maybe you'll notice over time, and not because it is such a cheerful topic to engage in, but because I find that it allows you to get to know people on such a deeper level. Grief is intimacy, it's love, it's presence and care, as much as it is also painful and debilitating at times, which we cannot ignore as well. But if you know me in real life, you know I have such a hard time engaging in surface level conversations or small talks because I know I talk a lot and I go deep really fast. And sorry, that's how I'm wired, fortunately. So it's also interesting as well for me to notice how people gravitate generally towards me so naturally when they're going through grief, and we can have a chat, right? I learn and grow so much during every single encounter, so I know how powerful it is. And can you imagine for a second how vulnerable and exposed we feel when we allow ourselves to experience the full range of our emotions, and particularly grief, rage, sadness, all those emotions that are considered quote unquote bad. The reality is when we truly surrender to how we feel in the moment, all those intense emotions, again, which are considered quote unquote bad or what people call low vibration, make us feel completely naked and raw. They strip away any illusions, lies, and there is absolutely nowhere to run to or hide but to let it happen. I used to be the absolute worst at letting go of control and surrendering to the process, not only when it comes to my feelings but also to everything else in life. When you never truly feel safe in your body and in the world, it is almost impossible to not try to control things, people, or outcomes in order to avoid pain and suffering. So you can imagine how my emotions in general felt like such a burden. I was always trying to get rid of or avoid. Every now and then, I learn to find balance between making it happen, taking full responsibility, and surrendering and letting go. And let me tell you a little story. So, about 4 weeks ago, now, which was like a week before I released part one, I was guided to journal because I was spiraling a little bit. And I know uninterrupted, uncensored, free writing is how I process my overthinking mind the best. As usual, I write down the stories that live in my head on the loop so they no longer just exist up there. I have a whole process around it to help me break the loop, starting from the way I write the story at the beginning to the questions I ask myself throughout in order to self-reflect and come to the truth beneath the story in the end. Once I go through that process, I can take an observer seat instead of always being enmeshed in all the worst case scenarios possible and negative thinking patterns. There really is a different kind of awareness that is born from writing words down and reading them out loud to yourself, or simply witnessing them on paper and feel them differently. What's very important for me here is that the process truly allows you to see how you speak to yourself, how you treat yourself, and how you ultimately view yourself. We are so used to the narratives that live rent-free, like people say on the internet, within our head or our mind on a daily, that we don't even notice them anymore. Sometimes it even feels like there are many people in our head and we feel overwhelmed by our thoughts. So over the years, the more I did the practice, the more habits and patterns I noticed. And I think what shocked me the most at first was how judgmental, unforgiving, and punitive I can be to myself, especially when I make mistakes. I would punish myself for days, even for the tiniest mistakes. And of course, now I know where all that comes from. And I try my very best every time to not keep anything inside anymore. It is all out on the paper. All that shame, guilt, negativity no longer have a place inside to hide, and it's being confronted instead of being ignored and pushed down like I used to. Not only can the feelings or emotions no longer hide, but the stories behind them can finally be heard, felt, and be set free as well. So writing, reading, and feeling all in the moment helps tremendously. And believe me, there's nothing more powerful than a woman who is able to feel herself, not just talk herself through emotions, but feel herself so deeply through any emotion she experiences moment to moment. To me, she's grounded, anchored, regulated, and very clear. So that kind of trust and intimacy with your own heart, your womb, your whole body for that matter, is very powerful, at least in my personal experience. It blows my mind how much deeper I go every time. It's like peeling the layers of an onion and discovering yourself anew every time. You might not like what you see when you peel, at like the first time, etc. But the end result is always worth it, especially when you are motivated by your own growth and transformation. Anyway, 4 weeks ago, after writing the story down for like 10 minutes nonstop, I started reading back to myself. And for a moment, I was brought back in time, precisely in 2023, after the most amicable and freeing breakup I had ever experienced in my life. And I'm not only saying that because now I'm looking back and I can see it. In the moment when it happened, I had so much clarity right away when we broke up. Of course, it doesn't take away the fact that it was still painful, because it's still a breakup after all. So the words I had just wrote down on paper 4 weeks ago, and I was reading it aloud to myself, felt familiar and similar to a poem I wrote a few months after that breakup as a way for me to find closure. It was a significant moment for me back then because it was the first serious relationship I was in after being intentionally single for 3 whole years. At the time, I felt ready for something different from what I was used to in my previous relationships, even though, again, I was still going through my healing journey. And isn't it interesting, though, how life challenged us precisely when we ask for something new or ask for our life to change? For example, I can think about the fact that challenges can show up as everything seemingly falling apart or feeling worse right before a breakthrough. For the past year, I had been praying for things to change and for me to get more clarity and guidance on a few decisions I had to make, which was similar to the situation I was facing back in 2023 while in that relationship. Last year, things specifically started to feel stagnant. I no longer felt fulfilled, and I could feel myself being called to finally embrace a new path and embody my medicine more intentionally. And I've been through enough of those big changes in my life as a nomad or world traveler to know that they don't come without their fair share of pain, grief, or loss. Particularly the loss of outdated belief systems or views on my life path, or relationships and old versions of me that are no longer in alignment with the life that I'm now dreaming into being. It's also tough to come to terms with that, though, isn't it? Because previous versions of us kept us safe and alive. They feel familiar and comfortable and somehow powerful enough to carry us through daily challenges. The unknown always feels a little scary at first, and when you are allergic to change like me, transitions never seem to be simple, easy, or fast for that matter. Besides, I remember in 2023, the challenge was not about being in a new relationship and asking for things to change in my next relationship. And coming from a sincere and surrendered heart, the truth is, I had to face myself, my deepest fears, childhood wounds, my demons that were so neatly tucked away, and my limiting beliefs. I mean, absolutely anything that was holding me back and keeping me stuck in the past. Otherwise, I would have fallen into self sabotage. Life or God had to show me that it wasn't so much about the other person like I used to believe, but more so about all that needed to change within me in order to receive and hold the love and the kind of partnership I was calling in. Because it's one thing to desire and receive the blessings, but would I have had the capacity to handle or hold the dream, the prayer, the desire? The answer was no. Because I hadn't realized at first, but I had built so many armors and invisible walls around my heart as protective mechanisms, not only based on my own story, but also on the stories of my mother, my grandmother, and all the women in my lineage. So things obviously needed to change more so, I would say, maybe on a cellular level, right? And even thinking on top of my head right now, it was clear that some of my preconceived notions of what romantic love and relationships should look like, or even what I thought I wanted out of them, were either heavily influenced or shaped by my parents' relationship, the way I saw men treat women in my community, or even the way they treated me while growing up, the society I grew up in, and what I heard people talk about online. I don't think I ever knew what I truly needed versus wanted in relationships prior to 2023. But believe me, and maybe I'm not the only one who does that or who has that, but I had this huge list though, and a letter I wrote to God about what I expected. It makes me smile when I think about how I was so much in my head at the time about this instead of actually being in my heart. And as a result of not knowing what I truly needed versus wanted, the way I acted while I was in previous relationships needed to be corrected. And of course, I couldn't do it while being single. Actually, I'm genuinely curious to know how many of us truly know what we desire from relationships, be it romantic or platonic. Are we able to feel into what we truly desire in order to feel fulfilled, content, reciprocated? And whether a relationship is an escape from our fear of loneliness or we are still able to feel whole, even in the absence of one. I can clearly remember some of the conversations I've had in the past about relationships, and I don't think people always knew what they wanted, or maybe they were just not honest or truthful about what went on in the relationships behind closed doors, or when there's not a big audience. Either we are also afraid of being judged, or we are so used to people please, perform, and pretend that we are constantly trying to project a certain image in order to be loved or admired or accepted. And isn't it very much what we see on social media these days too? We end up envying of or putting certain people on pedestals based on the tiny, I would say, created portion of their lives they decide to share with the world online. I even remember that one particular spiritual teacher I used to follow and admire at the beginning of my journey. And from time to time, she would talk about her marriage, of course, giving us a glimpse into the part that we could see or she wanted to share at the time. And it always felt like she had the perfect marriage, like the fairy tale wedding and relationship. I was admiring her story. I'm not gonna lie. I was one of those people who used to admire her story so much. And that's what even brought me to be okay with the idea of downloading dating apps back then, because I was so resistant to it at first. Like, I didn't want to. But hearing her talk about her relationship, I was inspired. Until that day, she stunned everyone when she announced on her page that her and her husband were getting a divorce. Right then, we got to witness that there was more to the story than what we used to see or what she used to curate for us online. And after that, I didn't like abandon the dating apps, but I feel like I needed some type of wake up call. Through her, I saw how I was still hoping for that fairy tale relationship, and parts of me clearly envied what she had. I'm not going to lie. And I just want to be completely honest. I did envy that story, that image that I was seeing. I wanted what she had. I was still waiting for my savior, the one who would complete me and whisk me off my feet. You know what I'm talking about. I was what you call a hopeless romantic. And you know what? Let me try and paint a mental picture for you. I'm pretty sure some of you will relate. You meet someone and everything feels right at first. The person feels like you're forever because you want it so badly to be true. So you overlook red flags or see them as minimal, especially at the beginning. I mean, you tell yourself people can change, right? Especially when they get to know you, because, you are the special one. So anyway, you ignore your gut feelings. And if you're anything like me, you love love. You love everything romantic. And after the first date, you are already dreaming and mentally picturing your wedding dress, the ceremony, and you try to convince yourself and maybe your family in the process that you found the one. It makes me smile, and I feel like such an idiot as I say this, and I wish you could see my face. But hey, listen, I was a sucker for a good love story for a very long time, and I was craving my own fairy tale story. So imagine that craving mixed with my wound of abandonment. It's not pretty at all, because there were always two predictable scenarios with me, which left me heartbroken at the end of the day. On one hand, I was either ready to run away when it didn't feel like what I thought it should look like. So at the first sign of trouble, my fear of being abandoned would be activated right away and I check out. When I was younger, I used to proudly say that I always have one foot in and one foot out in relationships. And I genuinely thought that it was such a flex. And on the other hand, at some point in the relationship, I would start holding on too tight to the person, especially when I believe I'm in love. I was afraid to let go and end up alone again. I would blame myself for every little thing and try to fix things as much as I could, or try to control. I would then make my entire life about the other person's need. And we all know what happens when you make someone your whole life, or like your whole raison d'etre. And hear me out. It's not like there's anything wrong with being in love with love. Don't get me wrong. I still am to some degree. I think the issue is when we fail to recognize when we are actually in love with someone and we are coming from a place of wholeness, versus when we are acting codependent or confusing love with attachment. In that second state, we are generally coming from a place of lack and or desperation, in my personal opinion, and based on my personal experience. These are two different type of energies we bring to a relationship, and either one of them can play in our favor or against us. In hindsight, I can see how I was coming from a place of lack, despite all the quote-unquote work I thought I had done on myself and old wounds I thought I had healed a long time ago. I was still performing in some way because deep down there was still a part of me that believed there was something or someone significant out there still missing from my life, and if only I would get to meet them, I would finally feel complete. That belief is kind of ingrained in us for a very young age. I remember having this exact conversation with my mom about how women in my country, for instance, will settle at a certain age and sometimes end up in those marriages with with men who are not suitable for them, and they are miserable for the rest of their lives because we are taught that by a certain age, like I would say my experience was 30 years old, if we are not married, then we are probably a failure. So a woman's value or worth was measured by her being married or being a mother. It doesn't really matter if you've accomplished other things in your life. I remember even when I was having that conversation with my mom, she shared that during her time, when she was younger, the age was even lower, like meaning I think around 24 years old, for example. And if you're not married at that age, you were being made fun of and ridiculed. So who wouldn't rather have the ring and being able to say she's a missus instead of being single and alone? And that makes me think about the fact that women have a different kind of pressure when it comes to the lens through which people perceive or judge whether we have succeeded in life or not at a certain age. And we can't deny that it includes whether we are married, have a partner, children or not. And I'm speaking from the experience that the society that I grew up in, for example. So I'm not speaking for everyone here. And this, of course, does not apply to all women nowadays because we now have a lot more freedom, choices, and options to choose from. But for me and a lot of the women I know, companionship is one of those lenses. I have a lot of compassion. Let me say this. I have a lot of compassion for that version of me because she wanted companionship and connection so bad, and honestly, there is nothing wrong with that. Humans are wired for connections, I think, but I guess some may crave it more than others. Today, I'm just glad the future me wasn't going to let her abandon herself one more time for the wrong companionship. We had a lot more awareness, self-worth, and also I would say self-love. More often than not, it takes time, commitment, and devotional practices, as well as a lot of forgiveness and self-compassion to liberate ourselves from some unconscious beliefs, patterns, and behaviors that have been embedded in us for so many years. And it is now my belief that a romantic relationship can act as that powerful and sacred container for growth, transformation, and also liberation. So I guess for me in that particular instance, the real test came when it was time for me to be in a relationship again and I was to apply all that I had learned on my own. And the test, which was that new relationship back in 2023, after being intentionally single for 3 years, like I said earlier, came to see if I would choose myself instead of needing to be chosen so badly again. For far too long, I had watched myself through other people's gaze, searching for external validation and approval, and abandoning myself in the process over and over again. The truth is, what my past showed me is that whether I run away or hold on tight, the result is always the same: heartbreak. Because my decision making is always motivated by deep-seated fears and anxiety. And this kind of heartbreak has a long history of hypervigilance, judgment, neglect, and abandonment. And this heartbreak wanted to be met and felt. So obviously, we separated after 3 months, prompting me to, or I would say dropping me into a deeper layer of my healing journey. The decision ultimately came from him because I was still getting to that place of full acceptance of the fact that it was over. But I instantly changed in that moment we talked because for the first time I decided to not fight it, to not chase, to not beg or even try to salvage the relationship. I didn't react. I surrendered and whispered to myself, "It is all good," which was very new to me, the way I reacted to the situation. And I know when we talked, I felt peace and relief, and I'm sure he did too. For the first time ever, even though I was experiencing the pain and grief of finding myself back at square one again and releasing someone I saw a potential future with, I was so clear on the fact that this was the best decision for the both of us. This heartbreak ended up being a gift because it brought me back home to myself when I chose to let go. I hadn't even realized it at first, but in that moment, I chose myself and believed so deeply that what was eventually mine wouldn't pass me by. It would be clear, consistent, loud, and delightful, not hot, cold, nonchalant, and unsure. I started journaling a lot more, obviously, as I always do after a breakup, to reflect and also to release any pain, shame, self-judgment, and grief on paper. Like I mentioned earlier, it doesn't just live in my head or in my mind anymore. The more I journaled, the more I was able to identify ways I had still abandoned myself in this relationship. And the beautiful thing about this is that I didn't beat myself or shame myself. I simply witnessed and engaged with that still wounded part of me. Luckily, after a few years of awareness and presence, I know my body well enough now to identify the patterns that show up when I feel like I have or I am abandoning myself. For instance, I can think of all the ways in which I put him first and the ways in which I put his needs over my own, his safety and comfort over mine, even though I was the one initially looking for safety in him. Once I had him, I forgot about me, as usual, because I had to protect what we were at all costs. I can also think of all the ways I kept checking in, making sure the relationship still worked for him, if it was what he still wanted, but not once did I ask myself, do I still want this? Do I still choose this for myself? Because I guess I was afraid of the answer, the truth, if I were to truly listen to my body's wisdom and the signs I was getting. I can even remember clearly how sometimes we would engage in discussions about the future and my heart will tighten up. And I read it today as a sign that my heart was trying to alert me to the fact that our vision for the future was very different. And one big disconnect, for example, can be around commitment and long-term commitment. How someone can be afraid of long-term commitment while you want something different. For example, you want to get married and you want to have children. And the person is actually trying to convince themselves that they can do it for you. But it doesn't work, right? And in that moment, you can choose to listen and trust the person's word instead of his actions and your own intuition. So obviously, part of the grief I was feeling wasn't about him no longer being part of my life, but more so about the fact that I had abandoned myself again at some point. For a moment, I chose to believe in the potential future because I believed he was trying his best instead of believing what the present moment was actually showing me. Although I thought I was doing everything right, there was still a part of me that was longing, hoping, needing, so trying to control and force a certain outcome instead of letting things play out. During this heartbreak, I realized that perfection is never the goal and shouldn't be the goal. And I had to learn to love even those parts of me I tend to dislike and I would have punished in the past. So although the words I was writing down in my journal 4 weeks ago looked new, the pain felt old and the grief was exhausting. I could recognize the narrative of the story behind my felt sensations. It had been a couple of weeks since I felt drained, extremely drained. I was experiencing more frequent body and heartaches. I couldn't seem to shake with just a good cry or after sharing it with someone close to me. It was obviously strange because my body doesn't generally feel this tired in the summer. In the past, I used to run to the clinic when I felt this way, thinking there was something wrong with me, especially during the days I was bedridden due to pain, only to be told that there's nothing wrong they could identify. Over time, I understood the answer wasn't outside but inside of me. So I knew the kind of pain I was experiencing 4 weeks ago required a deeper inquiry. The first question I asked myself as I lay down in bed was, am I abandoning myself again? And how? Because everything seemed good. Everything seemed good right now. But right at this moment, I was met with a wave of sadness and a feeling of betrayal after I asked the question. I chose to sit with the sensations, and it generally doesn't take long for the tears to start rolling down my cheeks when I start taking deep breaths. It physically felt like I was carrying such a heavy burden, especially around my chest area and my back, that finally felt acknowledged and witnessed. I realized this feeling of betrayal was a few months old, or maybe a year old. Since a few months back, I was struggling to make these important decisions, and I was not putting myself first. Holding on to a sense of loyalty I felt back then to certain people, things, and places, especially for someone like me who is afraid of change and feels comfortable in certain circumstances. The thought of making those hard decisions made me feel sick to my stomach, because I wasn't really thinking about me, but how others would perceive my choices and my decisions. So since I moved provinces earlier this year, I had been suppressing how I felt, attributing it to the fatigue from the move. It turned out it was grief I didn't allow myself to feel for many reasons. I will not go into too many of the details, but I wasn't allowing myself to feel for many reasons. And now I could finally acknowledge the paralysis I felt in my decision-making process earlier almost led to self-sabotage of not only my current relationship, but also my project and my truest desires. The truth is, self-abandonment doesn't only show up in my relationship, but it also affects my ability to create and creatively express, and even just to show up for myself, others authentically, and pursue my dreams. It is still quite fascinating to me how the more I read, the more I discover, in terms of research already available out there, the link between the mental and the physical. Books like The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate, and In an Unspoken Voice, How the Body Releases Trauma and Restores Goodness by Peter A. Levine, are great resources to understand the body so much deeper. And if you're curious, especially if you've ever experienced trauma in your life, please do yourself a favor and read them, of course, if you want to. But yeah, I can't recommend these books enough. Right now, I'm also reading another book called The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. Another enlightening book, in my humble opinion, and that I'm completely mesmerized by, and I highly recommend. I've had this book, I would say, on my shelf for a few years now, but I felt called to read it more so recently. I find that sometimes books will do that to you. It's like you buy them, but you don't immediately read them. And at some point in your life, you feel like the wisdom that's included in the book is calling to you in some way. So, yeah. In one of the chapters, he says the following: every day we bear a burden that we should not be bearing. We fear that we are not good enough or that we'll fail. We experience insecurity, anxiety, and self-consciousness. We fear that people will turn on us, take advantage of us, or stop loving us. All of these things burden us tremendously. As we try to have open and loving relationships, and as we try to succeed and express ourselves, there's an inner weight that we carry. This weight is the fear of experiencing pain, anguish, or sorrow. Every day, we are either feeling it or we are protecting ourselves from feeling it. It is such a core influence that we don't even realize how prevalent it is. So yeah, this is true for me. And I'm wondering if it could be true for you too. Especially when we are surrounded by so much chaos, heaviness, bad news, and life feels stressful, threatening, and hopeless on the outside. How safe do we feel inside our own bodies to be with us, first and foremost, before sharing our true self with the world? To drop our armors, to speak up for our needs, to meet ourselves and others in the depths of our anguish and sorrow. And most importantly, to love and choose ourselves no matter what the world tells us over and over again. This summer, my body invited me to spend more time with my heart, and I'm glad I listened, and I did. And I was also led to a new descent into my womb, into the dark, in order for me to face the parts of me I might still be hiding from, the parts I might still be denying and shutting down, the parts I might still be unwilling to let go of, in order for me to receive what I've been asking for. The pain and grief were asking me to examine where in my life have I maybe abandoned myself again. Not only recently, but even during the past year when I was struggling to make those important life decisions. If you are going through some kind of transition right now, I'm asking you, where in your life are you maybe abandoning yourself to? If you are, I know the world feels like a lot right now, but what can you or what do you do to take care of yourself? And do you listen when your body is asking to be nourished? Because let me tell you this, you deserve it. I'll leave you with those questions. And thank you for hanging out with me today. As always, I would like to express my deepest gratitude for your presence, your open heart, and your listening ear. Mide Munase, which means again, thank you in my mother tongue. Until next time, all my love.